So, grief counseling from a faith-based approach. As I always like to do, first I start by showing the way it is often done, and then I will show why this way, why it's not working, and what we should do instead. Or at least what I would do if a client would come to me to work with grief. Now, before we start, let's note that we recognize that grief, it's a natural emotion that we need to process, and that this processing, it can take some time. But if this grief becomes unnatural, if we cannot get out of this vicious circle, we cannot get back to our lives. Now, this means we need to work with this emotion of grief. And everyone, I think, should decide for themselves at what point their sense of grief, it goes beyond normal. I will be talking here from the perspective of dealing with grieving situation which became debilitating, unhealthy and prolonged beyond what's necessary. Before we start, a very quick trigger alert. Some of you may find that the way I talk about this, it is cynical. I'm not recognizing the enormous suffering of those who are dealing with grief and all of that blah blah blah. So, to answer this, I can say only one thing. I'm going to talk about what I believe is actually working, and I'm going to stick to this. Those sweet talks, they can appear helpful, but as you will see further, they're not solving the problem and only extend and prolongate this grief and suffering. So, if you're ready to hear the bitter truth that shall set you free, then yes, please continue watching. So that was a trigger alert, and here is a spoiler alert. Here are the three things or three reasons why some people may stuck in their grief process. And they are, first one, secondary gain. Second one, the loss that has resonated with much older and deeper trauma. And the third one is when the person suffering from grief is unable to face, unable to accept the new situation after loss and not wanting to deal with consequences. Now, let's talk about each one in more details. So, like I said earlier, and I repeat once again, we all recognize that to grieve, it's natural and healthy. And what's unnatural and what's unhealthy is to be stuck in the grieving process to the extent that person becomes completely dysfunctional. And here, someone might think, oh, the person is grieving so intensely because they lost their parent or spouse and they love them so much. But no. This is not actually about the lost one. It is about, in Arabic we say nafs, which in English means it is about self. So it's selfish, not in a negative judging way, but just as a matter of fact, it is about the person grieving. It is not about the person they've lost. And once we realize that, now we have a fair chance to actually resolve the issue. So, secondary gain. I'm not going to be giving any academic formal definitions. I'm going to give some explanation through examples. Imagine a person hates doing certain household responsibilities. So let's say we have a husband. He got some family duties which are supposed to be done on a weekend. And when it comes to working days, he's okay. But Saturdays, Sundays, he's, let's say, suffering from severe headaches. And those headaches are real. He's not pretending. And let's say he will go to doctors. And if he is, for example, an office worker, the doctors will tell him what? They'll say, well, that's because you are sitting in a chair the whole day. But if let's say he's a construction worker, then the doctors will tell him what? That's because every day you are doing heavy physical labor. But the actual reason could be what we call secondary gain. Yes, he is suffering from these headaches, but they are actually serving as a protection from the duties that he hates so much, because when he got headaches, he just lays in bed and does nothing. So grief, and what is grief? Grief is a sense of loss. it also can come with its own benefits. So, for example, imagine you have a woman and her husband passed away. Now, the whole family, all the colleagues, friends, they come, they attended the funerals. Now they give lots of attention, lots of love, lots of care to this widow. And normally, if you want to get attention and care from others, what you're supposed to do by giving the same in return. But here, you got another option to get it for free. This is when you suffer loss. You receive care for free. But the moment you stop suffering, it means that you will stop getting it. So if I continue suffering, I will continue receiving visits, calls, messages. How are you doing? How are you coping? And the answer will be what? I'm not doing well. I'm not coping well. Because the moment I will say I'm well, I will stop receiving all this attention. And the person is not even aware about it, because the person's suffering is real. We have to understand it. But decision to continue grieving, it has been made not on conscious and rational, but unconscious emotional level. And this is why you cannot deal with it rationally by means of logical arguments. What you have to do, you have to go one level down on the level of emotions. That's what we always do in nafsa by working with emotions. And then we have to ask some unpleasant questions. And what are those unpleasant questions we're going to ask? For example, it could be, what are you going to lose if you will stop grieving? And the answer could be people's attention. Another question would be, are you ready to take responsibility for the way you relate to other people? In other words, if you want to receive care, are you ready to give care as well? And if answer is yes, well, it's very easy actually to solve the problem. But if the answer is no, then you cannot force people to be happy. There is nothing you can do then. Imagine a man suffered an abandonment trauma as a result of his mother, let's say, leaving him alone in childhood. And let's say he made a decision. And because this abandonment happened back then in childhood, and it was very abnormal, rapid, traumatic experience, the decision was made on the unconscious level. And he made decision, he decided to be a convenient person when interacting with others generally and with his mother in particular. Why? For what purpose? Of course, to avoid being abandoned again, because abandonment for a child actually implies a death threat. But then let's say we have this situation of loss, his mother passed away, and now it becomes clear that this compensation strategy, it's not working anymore. Why? Because by being a convenient person, it's not going to bring your mother back to life. So what is happening is actually the old trauma is re-emerging. And now it literally asking to be dealt with it. Because now it has to be resolved in a different way. And if now this person is unconsciously feeling abandoned, because the same traumatic situation comes up, you cannot deal with it consciously by means of some kind of theological discussion about life after death, how all of us will die, how you're going to meet your mother in paradise, and so on. And how do you know it's not gonna work besides experience? Ask yourself, would it be a helpful way to talk to a 5-year-old child who lost his mom and he cannot find her? No, it won't. Same situation here. And this is why it's not working, because we're working with emotions. Or another possible scenario for this kind of abandonment trauma would be, let's say a man married a woman, and he is projecting on her the figure of his mother who abandoned him. So for him, his compensation strategy is that by being with his wife, and by his wife being with him and not leaving him, this is his way of coping with the trauma. But what if suddenly she will decide to break up and divorce, or maybe she passes away? So now, imagine, in this situation you are trying to use logical argument, trying to deal with the situation, and you say, this happens, there are many other women out there, But the problem is he does not want other women. He wants his mom. Or at least we could say he wants the woman that will play the role of his mother. And maybe he will find her. And if there will be, let's say, another divorce, this means we are back to our initial scenario. Or maybe it was a different initial situation. Maybe a young sibling passed away, but for whatever reason, that became a traumatic experience. And then that person becomes a father. And let's say he loses his little son. Same thing. The old trauma is going to be back, and now it's time to deal with it. And here, let me say a few words of encouragement. If this situation happens, if the trauma is re-emerges and it comes up, it simply means that now you are ready to process it and deal with it. Because if it would not be the case, if you were not unable, if you could not handle this, it simply would not be coming back. It would not be asking itself to be resolved. I'm sure you probably heard about 5 stages of grief that starts with denial and ends with acceptance. So this state of denial, this being unable to accept this new reality, it's exactly what we are talking about. As always, let's start with some scenario which is easy to visualize. Mother's son passed away. Now the mother says, "He was the only meaning of all my life. I cannot live anymore." So what's behind this grief, or rather should we say, what's behind being unable to accept this new situation? It is not wanting to realize that your choice to make your son to be the meaning of your life, it was a mistake. So the choice now is what? It's either to accept that your life has no meaning now, and that's obviously very painful, and that's exactly what's causing enormous suffering, and this choice is not gonna work, and that's why some well-meaning advice that, your son is not dead. He is actually in a different world, and he can see you and he can hear you. It's not helpful at all, because that just keeps this mother spending, let's say, every day visiting the grave, being focused entirely on the afterlife realities and so on. Why? Because this is not acceptance, it's the opposite. It's the denial of a new situation that she is supposed to face to make changes in what she believes is a meaning of her life. Or let's take another situation. A certain woman cannot recover after divorce. Now, why some women are happy that they have removed the burden from their shoulders, and this specific woman cannot accept it. Why? Well, it could be that, for example, she always thought that she is ugly, unattractive, not likable at all. And then, by some miracle, as she unconsciously believes, she met someone who married her, and then even that only person in the whole world has abandoned her. So you see, all her life, she was running away from this feeling, running away from this belief of being ugly, and she thought she managed to hide her ugliness from everyone, and most importantly from herself. She hid it well by marrying the man, and now she feels she is exposed again and even worse than before, because now it feels like, who did you try to fool? Why were you pretending like you are a beautiful woman at the first place? You cannot deceive anyone. Look, he abandoned you. He divorced you. And what happens now? Now she has to make a decision. She will either walk with her self-worth, self-esteem problem, this negative self-identifications being ugly, and then she will definitely can learn a lot about her life. For example, she could learn, maybe, that she has never really loved her ex-husband. And maybe the only reason she married him is because at that moment, back then, she was scared that if she won't marry now, there will be no other chance in the future to get married. Maybe also she will realize that she was never actually happy in that marriage, because, for example, she could not protect her boundaries. because she was afraid of being abandoned. And that's exactly what happened at the end. And many other things like that she can learn about herself. And all of those things which are painful, but they are necessary to be dealt with if, of course, she wants to actually have a happy life. But that implies taking responsibility for her life, for dealing with her emotions, for dealing with these negative beliefs, and at the end, for actually making an effort to find a suitable partner. And of course, the other option is always there, to be stuck in a grieving process, maybe keep blaming her ex-husband for divorcing her, for destroying her life. Now, so as you can see, situation is the same, but from one perspective, it is my love has ended, and from another perspective, it is my life has just begun. So we went through 3 possible reasons why someone can be stuck in a grieving process. So it's a secondary gain, event that resonates with much older and deeper trauma, and third one is denial, being unable to face and accept new situation after loss and not wanting to deal with consequences. Now, these 3 reasons, they're not mutually exclusive. They can, and they most probably will, coexist together and mutually supporting each other, system which supports itself. And that will keep person in that unhealthy situation of being stuck in grieving process. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I'll see you in the next video.